The ship's engine hummed as Ryder Thomas drifted through the vast emptiness of space, his eyes fixed on the star chart flickering on his console. The quiet hum of the ship felt almost comforting in the loneliness of the deep reaches of the galaxy. It was the same kind of silence he had come to know during his years as an explorer. Alone, but at least, unlike the rest of humanity, he was free from the burden of the galaxy's endless conflicts. Ryder's missions were simple: find, scan, retrieve, and get out before the endless wars of the galaxy closed in on him. That was until the signal came. A strange energy signature had appeared on his scanner, faint but persistent. The coordinates led him to an uncharted planet, one so far off the beaten path that it wasn't even marked on most galactic maps. Curiosity piqued. Ryder set course for the planet, unaware that this seemingly insignificant blip would soon alter the trajectory of his life and the fate of the galaxy. The ship touched down in the dense, fog-laden forests of the unknown planet, a quiet world that had not known the touch of civilization for centuries. The air was thick, heavy with moisture, and the sky was perpetually covered by thick, gray clouds. The landscape was eerily beautiful, filled with trees that towered above him like ancient sentinels. There was something unnervingly tranquil about the place, peace that seemed almost unnatural. Ryder stepped off the ship, the soft crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots the only sound that accompanied him. He carried a standard blaster at his hip, though he knew it would be of little use if something hostile lurked here. His goal was to track down the source of the strange signal, but he had no idea what awaited him. The signal itself had been steady but faint, a signature beyond the reach of most conventional technologies. Something ancient, perhaps even alien. Navigating through the dense underbrush, Ryder finally came upon the location indicated by his scans. A massive, crumbling structure, its surface covered in vines and moss. It looked as if it had been there for eons, untouched by time. The walls were smooth, almost as if they were made from a material that had never been seen before. His pulse quickened. This wasn't just a forgotten ruin. It was something much more. The entrance was sealed, but Ryder was able to pry open the massive door with a bit of effort. Inside, the atmosphere was dense with dust, and the air felt oddly cold despite the humid environment outside. The facility had clearly been abandoned, and yet the faint energy signature remained. Something was here, something important. Ryder's heart raced as he moved deeper into the building, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing strange symbols on the walls, symbols that he couldn't begin to decipher. They pulsed softly, as though alive with energy. He came to a large chamber, its ceiling lost in the shadows above. In the center stood a large metallic pod, its surface gleaming in the dim light. It was like nothing he had ever seen, sleek, alien, and yet somehow familiar. At the base of the pod, a glowing console pulsed in rhythm with the faint energy he had traced here. It was this that had brought him to this place. But now that he was here, he had no idea what to do. Ryder's instinct screamed at him to leave, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. He couldn't just walk away. With a deep breath, he approached the console. His fingers hesitated over the controls, unsure of what he might unleash. But he had come this far. What harm could pressing a few buttons do? With a soft hiss, the pod began to open. Ryder stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. The inside was dark, but something moved. Slowly, a figure emerged from the depths of the pod, its form almost entirely concealed in shadows. It was humanoid, delicate features, long hair that shimmered like silver under the faint light. As it stepped forward, Ryder's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with an intense, ethereal light. Her gaze locked onto him, unblinking, as if she had been waiting for him. For a moment, Ryder couldn't breathe. He was frozen, caught in her gaze. He could tell immediately that she was not human, her features far too alien, her presence far too commanding. "Who are you?" Ryder's voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. The figure blinked slowly and deliberately before she spoke. Her voice was soft at first, but it carried with it a strange authority, as though it had echoed through galaxies and time itself. I am Zalera. The words held weight, as if she was awakening from a long, deep slumber. And I have slept for 100 years, hidden from everyone, until you discovered and woke me. Ryder's mind raced. A century-long slumber? Hidden from everyone? She was a princess, perhaps even royalty, but this was not something his training had prepared him for. Before he could ask another question, the sound of distant thuds reverberated through the structure, followed by the unmistakable screech of tearing metal. Ryder's body tensed. Whatever had been dormant here for so long, whatever secret this place held, it wasn't safe anymore. The floor shook, and a low growl echoed through the chamber. From the shadows emerged a horde of HFY, grotesque, insectoid creatures that had been lying in wait. Ryder's instincts kicked in as he drew his blaster, firing a quick shot into the closest creature. But they kept coming. Too many to count, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural hunger. Zalera's eyes flashed. Without warning, she raised her hand, and a pulse of raw energy burst from her, sending the nearest HFY flying into the walls. Ryder watched, stunned, as she effortlessly obliterated the creatures around her with a precision and power he could barely comprehend. But it wasn't enough. The HFY were relentless, swarming toward them, undeterred by the blast of energy that Zalera emitted. Ryder fought back with everything he had, shooting down a few, but it was clear they were overwhelmed. You have no idea what I am, do you? Zalera spoke, her voice now laced with raw power that sent chills down Ryder's spine. These creatures were never meant to keep me hidden, but they failed, and now they will pay. She raised her hand again, this time summoning an energy field that enveloped her and Ryder. The HFY screeched in fury as they collided with the invisible wall, unable to break through. With a flick of her wrist, Zalera sent the wall crumbling into nothing, and the remaining creatures scattered in fear. Ryder stood there, breathless, staring at the woman, or the being, that had just annihilated an entire horde of alien creatures without breaking a sweat. The air was thick with the aftermath of her power, and Ryder knew that his discovery had just set off a chain of events he couldn't possibly understand. "What are you?" he finally managed to ask. Zalera met his gaze, her eyes filled with something deep and ancient. "I am the last of my people, and now I will shape the galaxy once more." Ryder knew then that this was no ordinary find. This was the beginning of something much larger, and as he looked into Zalera's glowing eyes, he understood that the galaxy had just been set on a new course. The crumbled ruins of the ancient facility were behind them now. Ryder and Zalera walked through the dense forest, the aftermath of the battle still fresh in their minds. Zalera's incredible display of power had obliterated the HFY, but Ryder knew that wasn't the end of it. There was something deeper, something darker, tied to her abilities. Something about the way she had harnessed the energy. It wasn't just survival instinct. It was power, raw, untamed, and it felt dangerous. Zalera moved with purpose, her pace steady despite the strange, sudden awakening she had experienced. The forest around them seemed oddly silent, as though the very world itself held its breath in the wake of her release. Ryder couldn't stop glancing at her. He had seen many things in his career as an explorer. Ancient ruins, alien tech, and even combat, but nothing had ever been quite like this. "You've been asleep for a long time," Ryder said, breaking the silence. 100 years. But those creatures, those HFY, were guarding you. They weren't just keeping you in here. They were keeping something else out. Zalera's head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable. "You speak the truth," she replied, her voice low, the weight of her words settling heavily between them. "I was placed here for a reason, hidden. My people feared what I could become." "You're not just a princess," Ryder said, more to himself than to her. "You're a weapon, a living weapon." She did not deny it, nor did she seem surprised. "I was born to bring an end to the conflict, to restore my people's rule across the galaxy. But my power, if left unchecked, could destroy everything. I was sealed away, my existence erased from history. Ryder's mind raced. If what she said was true, the galaxy could be on the brink of collapse. So, if you're as powerful as you say, why didn't they just use you? Why hide you away? Zalera glanced at him, her gaze intense. Because those who once ruled sought control. They feared that if I woke, I would seek to overthrow them. They feared what I would do with the knowledge of the ancient powers my people once wielded. They feared me. Her eyes darkened, and Ryder could sense the conflict within her. And now, that fear has returned. The galaxy is not what it once was. It's fractured, torn apart by endless wars. Ryder stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. You said your people once ruled the galaxy. What happened to them? Are they all gone? Zalera's gaze softened and she sighed. My people were once great, a civilization beyond the understanding of most species. But we were brought down by treachery by our own kind. My family, my bloodline was betrayed and my civilization was shattered. There was a long pause as the weight of her words hung in the air. Ryder didn't know how to respond. The things she was saying sounded like the stuff of legends, not something that could be real. And yet everything about her, the raw power, the knowledge in her eyes, told him that there was truth in her words. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. Ryder's hand shot to his blaster, his heart racing. In the distance, he heard the unmistakable hum of engines, the sound of a fleet descending from the sky. The quiet, peaceful forest was now anything but. They've found us, Zalera said, her voice hardening with resolve. The Empire is searching for me. A fleet of warships descended from the clouds above, their sleek black forms cutting through the sky with deadly precision. Ryder's heart sank as they drew closer. Their massive cannons locked on the position of the two travelers. From the trees, a squadron of heavily armored Gorath soldiers emerged, armed with energy rifles and robotic drones. Their red eyes glowed with menace as they closed in. Stay close, Zalera commanded, her voice sharp, almost cold. Ryder didn't need any more encouragement. He rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. The Gorath were a formidable force. Mercenaries, hired by whoever was in control of the galaxy's fractured empire. If they were after Zalera, then they had no idea just how dangerous she truly was. Get ready, Ryder muttered under his breath as the first wave of Gorath soldiers stormed toward them. Zalera's gaze hardened, and with a single motion, she raised her hand. Energy crackled around her fingers, the air itself bending to her will. Ryder had only seen glimpses of her power before, but now it was something else entirely. A burst of energy erupted from her hand, knocking the first few soldiers off their feet and sending them flying backward. Their rifles were no match for the force she unleashed, but there were too many. The Gorath pressed on, their numbers overwhelming. Ryder fired his blaster, taking down a few of the robotic drones, but he knew it wasn't enough. They needed to retreat, to get out of the open before the enemy's reinforcements arrived. Come on, Ryder shouted, grabbing Zalera's arm, but she didn't budge. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief moment, her expression focused. Then, with a single motion, she lifted both hands into the air. The ground beneath them trembled as an invisible shockwave radiated outward, blasting the Gorath forces back and creating a barrier of pure energy. Ryder stumbled back as the shockwave knocked him off his feet, but Zalera remained standing, unshaken by the force she had unleashed. This is not how it ends, Zalera muttered under her breath. Not for me. She turned to Ryder, her eyes glowing brighter than before. We need to move. I can't hold them off for long. Ryder nodded, his mind racing. They had no choice now. With Zalera's power, they could hold their ground for a while, but the Gorath had the resources to bring in more forces. They couldn't afford to stay and fight, at least not until they understood what they were up against. We head for the outpost, Ryder said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. We get to the rebels, and we figure out what to do next." Zalera didn't argue. She simply nodded, and together, they bolted through the dense forest, the sounds of gunfire and explosions ringing in their ears. The path ahead was uncertain. The rebel outpost was still days away, and Ryder knew that the road would only get harder. But something told him that, with Zalera by his side, they could change the galaxy if they survived long enough. In this chapter, the narrative delves deeper into Zalera's backstory, hinting at the ancient and immense power she possesses. The first action sequence intensifies the stakes, and Ryder and Zalera's partnership begins to form, setting the stage for the battles and revelations to come. The question of how to control or wield Zalera's immense power remains unresolved, creating tension for the future. The rebel outpost was barely a speck on the map, a last-ditch sanctuary for the galaxy's oppressed. Ryder and Zalera had been traveling for days, their path taking them through hostile territories and desolate landscapes. The more they journeyed, the more Ryder realized the magnitude of the conflict they were walking into. The galaxy had fractured into countless warring factions, each claiming a piece of the universe as their own. But there was one empire at the center of it all, the Empire of Zorth, led by Emperor Dorian, a ruthless ruler whose ambition knew no bounds. Zalera had explained little of the empire, but from the few words she had shared, Ryder understood that the Zorth Empire was once ruled by her family. The bloodline that had brought peace, prosperity, and order to the galaxy had been replaced by corruption, fear, and tyranny. Her own people had turned on her. Her own blood had betrayed her. As they neared the outpost, a sense of unease settled over Zalera. Her movements had slowed, her gaze distant, as if sensing something in the air. Ryder noticed her stiffen as they approached a cluster of rocky hills, where the outpost was nestled. She was no longer the confident, powerful figure he had grown accustomed to. She seemed almost afraid. "What is it?" Ryder asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's wrong?" She shook her head. "I don't know. I feel a presence. Something I haven't felt in a long time." Before Ryder could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. Ryder instinctively reached for his blaster, his heart pounding in his chest. Out of the mist emerged a figure, cloaked in shadows. He was tall, armored in a sleek suit of dark metal, his face obscured by a mask, save for his glowing red eyes. A single figure, but one that made the air around them grow heavy with dread. Zalera's face went pale as the figure stepped into full view. "No," she whispered, a chill running through her spine. "It can't be. He's dead." Ryder's eyes narrowed. The man before them was no ordinary soldier. There was a power radiating from him, one that felt eerily familiar. His stance was regal, commanding, and yet there was something about him that seemed wrong, something that didn't fit. The man spoke, his voice cold, almost mechanical. "It's been a long time, sister." Zalera's breath caught in her throat. "Nyron, you're supposed to be dead." The name echoed in Ryder's mind. Nyron, Zalera's brother. She had mentioned him once, a prince who had supposedly died in the final days of her kingdom's fall. But now, here he was, standing before them, very much alive, and his presence could only mean one thing: betrayal. Nyron tilted his head slightly, the glint of amusement in his glowing eyes. "Did you think I would simply die, Zalera? That your little rebellion would be enough to take me down? No. I have been watching you, waiting for the right moment." Zalera stepped back, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You betrayed me. You betrayed our people. You sided with the Zorth Empire and watched as they destroyed everything we fought for. And now you come to finish what you started." Nyron's laughter was hollow, devoid of emotion. "It was never about our people, Zalera. It was never about what you thought was right. It was always about power. And you," he gestured toward Ryder with a cruel smirk, "are a pawn in a game you don't understand." Ryder's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the conversation. He had heard whispers of internal power struggles within the royal family, of betrayals, and dark alliances. But this was something far more sinister. You think you're going to stop me? Niren continued, stepping forward, his hand glowing with the same energy Zalera had used. You think you can undo what's been set in motion? You are nothing, Zalera, a relic of a past that is long gone. Zalera's eyes blazed with fury, but her voice remained calm. You've made a mistake, Niren. You've forgotten who you're dealing with. Without warning, Zalera raised her hand, and the ground beneath Niren began to crack. Massive boulders erupted from the earth, flinging toward him with blinding speed. Niren deflected them with a wave of his hand, the energy around him shimmering with dark power. Ryder barely had time to react before the two were locked in a battle of raw energy, their powers colliding in a blinding explosion. The force of the impact sent Ryder stumbling backward, his ears ringing. As he regained his footing, he saw Zalera and Niren engage in a furious battle, their energy blasts lighting up the sky. The very air between them seemed to tremble, as though the planet itself was straining under the intensity of their powers. Ryder didn't hesitate. He dove behind a nearby boulder for cover, knowing he couldn't get involved directly in the fight. This was a battle between siblings, a fight that could destroy everything around them if it escalated further. Zalera's voice rang out, her words sharp as blades. You were always weak, Niren. You always wanted power, but you never understood what it meant to wield it. You're nothing more than a puppet for Dorian and his empire. Niren's eyes flared with fury. You think I'm a puppet? I am the one who controls everything now. You think you can stop me? You think anyone can stop me? Zalera's hand crackled with energy as she reached toward him. The sky darkened, the winds picking up as she focused all her power into a single, devastating strike. But before she could unleash it, Niren vanished in a burst of energy, reappearing behind her. Not so fast, sister, he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. You may be strong, but you'll never be able to control your power. Not like I can. Zalera whipped around, fury in her eyes, but Niren was already gone, vanishing into the mist, leaving only the faintest trace of his presence behind. Ryder emerged from his hiding spot, his breath still heavy from the adrenaline. What was that? He asked, his voice hoarse. Zalera stood there, her expression one of disbelief and exhaustion. She hadn't won. In fact, it felt like she had barely survived. That was my brother, Niren, and he's working for the Zorth Empire. He's their weapon. Ryder looked at her, trying to process what had just happened. Niren, the brother she had thought lost, the one she had trusted, was now one of the most dangerous figures in the galaxy. But why? Why would he side with them? Ryder asked, his mind racing. Why betray everything? Zalera's face was a mask of regret and anger. Because Ryder, he always wanted to rule. He always wanted power. And the Zorth Empire promised him exactly that. He's become something monstrous, a tool of destruction. The air was thick with the weight of her words, and Ryder knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was about to be plunged into a conflict unlike anything it had ever seen, and Zalera, the last of her people, would have to face not only the Empire that betrayed her but her own brother, the very person she had once trusted most. As the winds howled and the shadows of the Empire closed in, Ryder and Zalera were left with one grim truth. The path ahead would be filled with betrayal, and their only hope was to stop Niren before he unleashed a war that would tear the galaxy apart. The night was unnaturally still. Ryder stood at the edge of the rebel outpost, gazing out at the stars. The wind rustled through the tall grass, but the silence that hung over the place felt like the calm before a storm. Zalera had retreated to the command center to regroup with the scattered rebel forces, her mind still reeling from the confrontation with Niren. Ryder knew better than to disturb her now. She needed time to process, just as he did. Niren's betrayal was a crushing blow, one that Zalera hadn't been prepared for. He was supposed to be dead, lost to the chaos of their family's fall. Instead, he had become an instrument of destruction, a puppet of the Zorth Empire with dark powers of his own. Ryder had witnessed the full extent of their abilities during their brief encounter. The battle between Zalera and Niren had torn apart the very earth beneath them, sending shockwaves through the forest. But what disturbed Ryder more than the fight itself was how easily Niren had used his power, how swiftly he had disappeared, as if he were more shadow than man. It had been clear. Zalera and Niren were not just siblings. They were the last of a lost race, with abilities that could reshape the galaxy. And yet, one had chosen to wield those powers for peace, while the other sought control, chaos, and destruction. Ryder's thoughts were interrupted by a soft but urgent voice behind him. "Ryder, we need to talk." He turned to find Zalera standing in the doorway of the command center, her expression grim but composed. Her eyes glowed faintly, and even in the low light, there was something about her, something that radiated both sorrow and resolve. Her power, raw and untamed, had been a force that could obliterate armies, but Ryder sensed that this internal battle with her brother had drained her more than anything. "You've been staring at the stars for hours. What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice steady despite the vulnerability that flickered behind her words. Ryder hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I'm thinking about what you said, about how you were supposed to bring peace, about your people's power, and I'm thinking about the way Niren's using that power now." Zalera walked toward him slowly, her steps measured. "I know you're wondering why Niren and I are so different. It's not just the power. It's how we were raised, the choices we made. We were taught to control our abilities, to use them for the greater good. But Niren, he never believed in that. He believed that power was meant to be seized, not wielded with responsibility." Ryder glanced at her, eyes narrowing. "You can't just let him get away with this, Zalera. He's working for the Empire, and the galaxy's already suffering because of it. You have to stop him." "I will," she said firmly, her gaze hardening. "But I can't do it alone, and neither can you." Ryder turned toward her, the weight of her words sinking in. "What do you mean?" Zalera paused, her expression conflicted. Before she spoke again, her voice quieter. "I mean that you, humanity, have something we don't, something that makes you different. You have a resilience, a drive. When faced with impossible odds, you don't just bend to the will of power. You fight. You survive. I've seen it firsthand, Ryder. I've seen how you're able to push through even when there seems to be no hope." Ryder took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. There was no denying it. Humanity had always been underestimated. Every species across the galaxy thought of humans as weak, as insignificant. They believed they would fall to the overwhelming power of the universe's most advanced civilizations. But here he was, standing beside Zalera, the last of an ancient royal bloodline, fighting to stop a galactic war. And he wasn't backing down. "We fight because we have to," Ryder replied, his voice resolute. "But we're not alone in this anymore, Zalera. You're not alone. We're in this together." She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You're right. I've been carrying the weight of this for far too long. But now I see there is a chance, a way to stop the Empire, a way to make sure that Niren doesn't destroy everything I've fought for." Ryder felt a surge of hope. "What do we need to do?" Zalera's expression hardened. "I need to take control of my power again. I need to access the knowledge my people left behind, before the Empire finds it and uses it against us. There is a place, a temple hidden deep within the planet's core. It holds the key to unlocking the true extent of my abilities. But getting there won't be easy. The Empire will be hunting us, and Niren will stop at nothing to ensure I don't get there first." "Then we go now," Ryder said, determination in his voice. "We don't wait. We take the fight to them." Zalera's eyes softened for a moment, but the sadness in her gaze quickly turned into something more powerful, a quiet, unyielding resolve. "We go now. But know this, Ryder. If I unlock my full potential, it will change everything. The galaxy will never be the same. Ryder met her gaze, understanding the gravity of her words. I'm ready. We're ready. The journey to the hidden temple was perilous. For days, they traveled through dense jungles, across rocky canyons, and over vast stretches of desert, always staying one step ahead of the Empire's forces. Zalera had grown quieter the closer they got to the temple. Ryder could feel the weight of her decision pressing on her, the uncertainty of what she might unleash once they reached their destination. Finally, after days of relentless travel, they arrived at the entrance of the temple. It was nestled within a massive, craggy mountain range, its entrance hidden behind an enormous waterfall. The place was as ancient as the legends, and it held the promise of both salvation and destruction. We're here, Zalera whispered, her voice almost reverent. Ryder stepped forward, his hand on his blaster. The temple loomed before them, an imposing structure carved from the living rock, its entrance flanked by two massive statues of long-forgotten guardians. The air felt heavy here, charged with ancient power. As they crossed the threshold, the silence enveloped them. Inside, the temple was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, filled with relics and strange alien technology. It felt alive, as though the very walls were watching them. But Zalera didn't hesitate. She led Ryder through the twisting halls until they reached a central chamber, where an ancient stone pedestal stood in the middle. Atop the pedestal lay an orb, shimmering with an otherworldly light. This, Zalera knew, was the key to unlocking the full power of her people. Ryder stepped back as Zalera approached the orb, her hands trembling. This is it, she said quietly. This is the power that can end the war. This is the power that can either save the galaxy or destroy it. With a deep breath, Zalera reached out and touched the orb. The moment her fingers made contact, the ground beneath them rumbled. The walls of the temple began to glow, the very air around them charged with energy. Ryder watched as Zalera's body glowed with a brilliant light, her power surging through her, awakening something ancient within her soul. The galaxy was about to change, and so were they.